Here we are, right where we left off before. Now let's load our custom mesh in this viewer so we can get to work on what we're focusing on. The mesh I'm using is was a prop that I modeled for the concept level that you saw pictures of at the beginning of the video. It's already UV unwrapped, it's low poly, that's all done, it's been triangulated so it can be easily exported into 3Do. It's in the OBJ format, that's what this viewer requires in the latest version. Previous generation of Endo you needed FBX, but this is a lot simpler to import objects into, in my opinion. So to do that, very simply, you open your 3Do custom loader here, select your mesh option. I'm going to double click on my OBJ, and right away you see your mesh in the viewport. I didn't discuss the viewport navigations before. They're pretty straightforward. The left click and drag will orbit the camera, right click and drag will zoom the camera, and middle mouse button and drag will pan the camera. And you can also use a tablet, which I am using now. In the previous version, a tablet would not work with the viewer. You had to use a mouse. So that's helpful for artists that prefer the pen instead of the mouse. Okay, now if I want to view this normal map on my mesh, I have to hit the refresh button. And of course, this is going to look strange when I import the normal on, because, well, it does kind of look cool, I suppose. But this normal information is it's not properly laid out, right, according to my UVs. And I can what I will do is just delete these two layers. They were just used as examples before, and that's gone. I can refresh the viewer if I need to clean things up. Sometimes you have to select the parent folder to access what you need to here with Endo. There we go. Okay, the model's going to be all clean there. And now I can just find my UV island image there, drag it into the document, and then make sure it snaps. I have snapping enabled currently in Photoshop, so this should align just fine with my, let me just make sure there. It does look a little bit tight. Let me delete that and try that again. I'll use this bottom corner as a basis. Okay. I suppose that's good. A little bit buggy. Strange. Let me fix this and I'll be right back. There we go, nailed it. Sometimes with the screen capture software, things can be a little bit choppy in Photoshop. I have to turn off OpenGL Performance, which has some nice handy features for speeding up the workflow, but that can bog things down quick when I'm recording. So if things look a little bit choppy, that's probably why. It's more of a screen capture issue than 3Do or Photoshop for most things. Okay, so here we go. This is my UV overlay. Now I have them positioned between these two layers, and I don't want that essentially because I don't want this. I don't want my UVs to be registered as normal maps. So I'm going to drag it to the top of my stack. And before I hit the refresh button, I'll just show you what it looks like now, I suppose. Select my parent folder, get the option to refresh. If I load it now, obviously the normals are going to look very strange because the color white is not. It's not an appropriate color for a tangent space normal map. So you're going to get strange things like this. You can always hide the layer before you hit the refresh button. That's one of those manual things that it's just part of the game when you're using a program like this. At least currently it is. It'd be great to have an automatic layer on top that shows your UV islands, but will not be flattened and sent to the 3D viewer. C'est la vie. So let's create a new multi-normal layer here and begin work on our project. Got to select the parent layer first, select new multi-normal, and I think I'm going to make this bevel facing down. So I'm going to call this down on the parent layer, activate my UV island overlay, and let's do something with the shape tool. The hotkey is U, and if you don't want the rectangle key, you can see that you have all these other options. And to the right, the hotkey is U for all of them. And if you're new to Photoshop, that may sound a little bit confusing. Like, how do you access the ellipse tool with a hotkey if the rectangle tool is showing. It's pretty simple. If you have other options in Photoshop, in that case, you hold Shift U, and you can see as I'm holding down Shift and tapping the U key, it'll cycle through all my options. And that's true for any tool within Photoshop. Magic Wand tool, you have different options for W. Shift W will change. The one I use quite often is alternating between the rectangle and the elliptical marquee select tool. Shift M will cycle between them if you don't want to go through the extra effort, if you can call it that, to select the tool from the toolbar here. So I'm going to select U for the shape tool, drag this one down here, and see what we get. Select the parent folder name. And so the first problems first here is when I selected that tool, because I had renamed this parent folder, I had this parent folder selected when I created the shape. So what it did is it automatically put the shape beneath it. So you're going to get an error like this. And if this happens, don't be alarmed. It's not correct, but it can easily be resolved by just dragging this shape layer down beneath the stack above the empty layer here that we don't need. And in fact, we can just delete it. So there you go. The layers above will colorize that shape appropriately, and you can hit the refresh button, and there you have it. Now I want to change the normal slant direction to down, so I'll do that here, and that will automatically refresh 3Do. So there we go. We have a normal that's cut into the surface here, but I don't like the position of it. So again, the beauty of using the vector shapes is you can move them. So hitting the A key and making sure my cursor is black, I can select the entire object, and then left click and dragging while holding Shift will constrain me to an axis, and I can hit the refresh button here. There we go. And that'll give me what I need. Now, this is where when you're working with custom meshes, you want to take into account your designs and how they align with other objects in your mesh. So, for example, I can change this shape here, and I'm going to hit the A key, and while holding Control, I'll left click on the canvas, and what that'll do is change my select tool to nodes only. So I'm only selecting these bottom 4 nodes, neglecting these, and I can pull this down while holding the Shift key. I can constrain it to the up and down axis. Then I'll hit refresh again, and you'll see that I've brought this shape down lower. But it may, for example, I don't know that I want the nozzle sticking out here. Maybe I want to have a little cutout. So I can quickly choose the rectangle tool here. Holding Alt and left click and dragging, I can create a cutout. See how that aligns. And a lot of this comes to, oh, that's a pretty accurate guess there. Might want to move it down a little bit more. So selecting the entire shape, I can just nudge with the arrow key down on my keyboard, change the position of it, and see how I do. That's good. So something simple and quick like that. It's only possible when you're using smart objects like this, where you can tweak and change. It's a great feature, like I said before. So we can add some more interest to this design. This really is, at this point, it's an aesthetic preference. If you're working on your own, you can create whatever you want with whatever style you want. Otherwise, work from your reference images. Okay, so if I hold Alt and I drag here, I will. Okay, in that case, I didn't hold Alt, and what happened is it created a new shape above the one I had before. So it's essentially, in a way, it's combined with this normal information because it's part of the same parent stack. It'll all be essentially flattened and rendered as a downward-facing normal. But what I wanted to do is use this as a cutout. So I can do this in 2 ways. I can draw the shape again, or I can merge these two. I didn't mean to double click that. I can select both layers and select Control E to merge them. So all our shapes stay intact. But then if I want to change what this particular shape does here, I can select it and go up to this top menu and say subtract the front shape instead of combine. And what that lets me do is essentially change the Boolean operation, if you're familiar with those terms in the modeling aspect. Okay, so now I can hit refresh. And there we go. I have something that's a little bit more interesting. I can add to that effect here by, say, finding our rectangle tool, holding Alt, and when I hold Alt, like I said before, it'll subtract from this current shape, and it'll create the shape on the same layer that I have selected there. So you can quickly create some pretty unique designs that would be difficult otherwise, right? So let's do something a little bit more. I won't texture this entire object. I'll just give you the basics of using the add subtract tools, and then we'll get into creating some textures here in a minute. Holding the Alt key and then adding the Shift key to my selection will enable me to drag a shape out from the center point that I clicked. If I release the Alt key, I'll drag the shape. The shape will essentially be created from the point that I originally clicked, but it won't expand out as you see it. I don't know what the correct term for it is, but you understand. You can see the difference. And holding Shift will constrain the shape to be a circle, right? It'll be a proportional drag. It's the same thing with the rectangle tool. You'll create a square if you hold the Shift key while you drag. Give Photoshop a moment here to update. Okay, and so what's happened here is instead of subtracting from the shape, sometimes it can get a little bit confusing when you're adding and subtracting, but in this case, because my normal is downward facing, and I've used this polygon shape here to subtract from the original, I don't want to subtract this shape from this shape. What I want to do is change the mode here to combine, and essentially what it'll do, it'll overlay this the way that I intended it. Okay. So if I don't like the position of that in the viewport, I can just use Shift and down arrow keys. That's probably too much. And I can reposition that object as I need to. Okay? General concept here. Now, what do we do if we want to add some specific patterns, right? I want to build on the shape that I have here, and I can use this color information within Photoshop to create something unique. Okay, so say I want to add some ribs or bars going down this this here. Let me move this over a little bit because I can be particular sometimes. That's better. It's pretty easy to do. So I'm going to create a new layer here, and I'll explain why in a moment. So using the rectangle shape tool here, I'm just going to grab some rectangles, and I want them to be about the width that I would like for the for this bar. And better yet, let's do something different. Let's create a new layer with a new normal face. Let's zip the one we're currently working in. Create a new one using the multi-normal format. Rename it to Up. And select that layer down here. Create a rectangle shape. And so this will look a little bit strange in the beginning, but essentially what we're going to get is just what we'd expect, an upward facing normal. Now what I'm probably going to do is decrease the bevel size to something maybe half that. Try 4. See what that gives us. So we can get the what I want to get is this flat face here as well as the bevel. If the bevel's too big, you lose that flat face there altogether. So let me select 2. See how that gives us. Okay, that's a little better. Maybe 3. This does look a little tedious, and there is some tedium involved when it comes to working with these things, but generally the program will respond a little faster than you see it now. Again, when you're not recording what you're doing. Okay, so I like that. I may want to decrease the depth a little bit, but I'll wait on that process. So I'll take this shape, and say I want to have a repeating shape going down this this design, but restricted within the form that I've already created. So say I want it to start up here, and I want to make it a little bit narrower, so I can hit Control T to transform this shape, and holding Alt while grabbing this form here, you can change the width of this based on the center point. That's not much of a change, but I'll stick with that too because we're dealing with a lot fewer pixels here than I'd prefer. I've also noticed here there's a strange little indent right here based on these shapes not aligning properly, so I may have to fix that later. But let me continue with what I'm doing. So I'll nudge this up a little bit more. There we go. Okay, now one key in Photoshop to producing a random pattern, maybe an array in a specific direction, or even radially, and we'll discuss that method here in a moment. You can copy the form that you currently have with a copy transform to function, and the keyboard shortcut for it is Control-Alt-T. Now Control-T will activate your normal transform mode like this here. Selecting Control-T, I can change the dimensions by grabbing any one of these corners. I can hit Escape to exit. If I hit Control-Alt-T, the tool will look the same, but what's different about it is it's made a copy of the original object, and I can manipulate whether it's the rotation or the translation, meaning up, down, left, or right of it. So I'm going to use Shift down and just quickly move the copy down here. And the reason this is important, it's not just a time saver when it comes to creating a quick duplicate. The real beauty of it here, comes next when you hit Enter and you confirm that translation. Without doing anything else, you hold Alt, Control, Shift, T, and every time you tap the letter T while holding the rest of the buttons down, you're going to make a duplicate of that original item, and it's going to use the transform information that you made when you used the Control-Alt-T, when you made the original duplicate, right? If that makes sense. We'll do that again a couple more times, so you can practice on your own. There we go. And I think you lose the function to do that once you open another tool. I don't really know. Still, this does look a little bit strange, right? So how do I trim this information based on the underlying forms? First things first, if I want to cut this away cleanly, I'm going to have to rasterize this information. So I'm going to lose access to these individual objects, okay? And I'm okay with that for the moment. So if I right click on this object, you can say rasterize layer. I have a hotkey assigned to it because I tend to use that function pretty frequently, but you can access it that way. Now if I hide this layer briefly, I can see what's going on underneath. Select the eyeball here in the layer stack, and using the magic wand tool, which is the hotkey W, you can select all the contents, basically all the colors on your image based on your selection. So the most important aspects are these settings up here. Tolerance essentially will, based on your selection, it's the tolerance that Photoshop is allowed to have for creating colors that are similar but not perfectly matching what you have. A low tolerance essentially means I only want to select this color. That's it. If I increase the tolerance to say 100, clear that selection with Control-D, then select again, you can see not only did I select this color but other variations of it according to whatever Photoshop decides. I don't exactly know what's going on under the hood there, but I do know that sometimes you have to play with your tolerance level. And in my case, I just want to use a tolerance of 1. Now these other settings are important. Anti-alias will give you a smooth transition on areas, particularly right here, where things can get a little jaggy. I keep that on to keep things smooth. Contiguous is important because I want to select colors, essentially this information here. This blue color here and nothing outside of it. If I had contiguous deselected, I would select this blue color and every other matching color in the document. Okay, and I don't want to do that, so I'm going to keep that on. And sample all layers is important because technically, if I want to select another area of the image, I don't necessarily have to have that image selected if I want to work in another layer. So generally, I keep this on, so I can select that information there, because technically this normal information is in this layer stack down here. I want to remain in the layer that I have here, which is this information, the layer stack above it, but use and access the color information beneath it without having to switch layers. So if I keep sample all layers on, it's a quick way. So now I want to delete let me open that layer again. I want to delete this information, everything outside of this selection. But I also want to create a little bit of a gap between the bevel and what I'm going to delete here. And what I mean by that is I want to shrink my selection, and I'll show you the difference here. When you have your selection, you can modify your selection in Photoshop by using the contract or the expand. And I use those enough that I've assigned hotkeys to them, or shortcut keys on my keyboard. So I'm going to load my, there we go, my contract function here, and I'm going to say use 5 pixels. That's probably too much, so let me go back, try that again, maybe use 3 pixels. That might be good enough. Okay, so I want to delete, all the information in my layer I want to remain in here, and delete everything else outside of it. Okay, so when I if I were to say hit the delete key now, it would do the opposite of what I want, right? So I undo that, and if I hold Control Shift I, I will essentially invert my selection. So everything outside of the selection, if I hit the delete key, will be removed automatically. And there we have it. So let's refresh this in 3Do and see what that looks like. Okay, that's pretty clean. I like how that looks. So essentially what we've done is we've created a unique shape here that's raised, but I've also capitalized on the existing design I have, and I think that looks cleaner, right? It's a quick way to use the information that we created in the previous layer down here, which looks great. If I want to add more details in there, you can quickly create a pattern and use your select tools in Photoshop to delete some information, right? So essentially it looks like this here was built custom purpose to fit within here, right? It's a beautiful look, and it can be used in a variety of ways. Okay, so we'll conclude this version, this lesson now, and then in the next video we'll discuss doing patterns again, but maybe something that's more radial, because the tool that we used to create the pattern here, to make an array going up and down, that was great. But what if you want to do something that's, say, a circle? So here in the next lesson we could say cut out a circle and do a pattern. Maybe something like when you're doing tires for a car, or again you just want something to look cool and different. I'll show you how to do that quickly. Okay? Thanks.